Let's talk about the importance of the U.S. Supreme Court in the context of the 2024 presidential race. I have come to believe, although I'm not certain, I could be wrong, that this election is make or break for the Supreme Court, particularly for liberals who want to restore the balance of power, who want to claw back at the increased conservatism that's grown in the court after Amy Coney Barrett replaced Justice Ginsburg. So obviously, we learned from 2016 that elections have major consequences for the U.S. Supreme Court. We could have had a liberal replace Justice Scalia. Anthony Kennedy may or may not have retired, but we certainly would have had a liberal replace Justice Ginsburg. So that brings us to 2024. We've had Stephen Breyer, who is more of a moderate liberal, replaced with a more staunch liberal in Ketanji Brown Jackson. And we've got 3 justices in their 70s. Clarence Thomas at 76, Samuel Alito at 74, and Sonia Sotomayor at 70. Chief Justice Roberts is 69, but I don't think he'll be going anywhere anytime soon. Elena Kagan's 64. The 3 young conservatives that President Trump appointed are all in their 50s. They'll probably be on the court for the next 20 years or so. And then we have Ketanji Brown Jackson, who's in her 50s as well. So basically, the way I see it, and the way a lot of other political pundits who are focused on the Supreme Court seem to see it, is that all eyes are on Thomas and Alito. Those 2 have been really controversial lately. They're the most conservative members of the court, arguably Thomas being slightly more conservative than Alito, Thomas getting a lot of, I guess you could say, hate for some of his corruption. But yeah, they're in the spotlight. There's a real good chance that if President Trump gets reelected in 2024, that he would essentially get to replace one or both of them. Now, there is a chance also, and I guess this is what I'll call my first possibility, and this is not great for liberals, but it's not terrible for liberals, that 4 years go by under a second Trump term, 2025 to 2029, and Thomas and Alito actually stay on the court and nothing happens. Just nothing. Now, this has happened before. It's definitely imaginable. I mean, Jimmy Carter's whole term went by and he didn't get to appoint any Supreme Court justices. Thomas, obviously, he's 76, so that's old, but plenty of U.S. Supreme Court justices have stayed on the court into their 80s. John Paul Stevens was 89 when he retired. So is there a chance that nothing happens? Yeah, there's a chance that nothing happens and that this is completely inconsequential. There's also the chance that both of those guys retire, in which case President Trump gets to replace them with a younger conservative face. And yeah, that would be pretty bad news for liberals because the Supreme Court would basically be untouchable for a while, probably the next 20, 30 years or so. Chief Justice Roberts, who knows what happens with him. But yeah, Alito and Thomas retiring under a Republican president would be devastating for liberals. There's also the chance, even worse for liberals, that something happens with Justice Sotomayor. She gets forced to retire due to health problems or something, in which case the Supreme Court would become 7-2 conservative, and that would be disastrous. You'd have 2 liberals who would need to win over 3 conservatives just for their view to win the day on the court. And essentially, it would be game over for a lot of progressive legislation, a lot of executive orders from Democratic presidents, and overall, just a really rough time. We'd never have seen anything like it. There's never been a time in this country's history, arguably, where there were 7 staunch conservatives and just 2 liberals. Then we have a possibility that there's a 5-4 conservative majority. If we get a Democratic victory, we get President Biden or any other Democrat who potentially replaces him, Newsom, Whitmer, whatever, and they get to replace either Thomas or Alito with a liberal nominee, in which case the balance of power is more evenly restored. And plenty of things are possible with a 5-4 conservative majority. In that case, you just need to win over a swing justice, Chief Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, one of them. So that would essentially be what we were at before 2020, before October 2020, when Trump replaced Ginsburg. Then there's also the chance even that this would be the best case scenario probably for liberals, that we get a 5-4 liberal majority court if a Democratic president takes office in January 2025. So Thomas and Alito are probably not going to retire under a Democratic president. But anything is possible. We've seen it before. We've seen cross-party retirements. William Brennan was a liberal appointed by a Republican Eisenhower, but he retired under George H.W. Bush when he had a stroke in 1990. Thurgood Marshall did not like George H.W. Bush. He was a liberal justice appointed under Lyndon Baines Johnson, but he ended up retiring and getting replaced with Clarence Thomas, which is part of what led to the big conservative shift in the court during the 1990s to today. So a cross-party retirement from either Thomas or Alito is always possible under a Democratic president. If both of them were to retire and Sonia Sotomayor were to retire in the next 4 years, we could see a 5-4 liberal majority with a more young liberal justice replacing Sotomayor and young liberal justice replacing conservative justices Thomas and Alito. So yeah, lots of things are possible. We never know. But as we've seen, elections have major consequences. Some of these decisions, like Dobbs, Loper-Bright, which overturned Chevron deference, some of these decisions would have gone differently had Hillary Clinton won in 2016. And whether you like these decisions or not, you got to admit that the Supreme Court is always a pretty compelling reason to go out and vote for the candidate that you want to be the next president of the United States. Essentially, you're not really voting for president, you're voting for who you want to be on the Supreme Court. Well, you're voting for more than just who you want to be president. But yeah, 6-3 decisions galore these days, and they're voting almost exclusively along party lines. There's really not much of that sentiment left where you had kind of justices who were appointed by Democrats who voted conservative, or justices appointed by Republicans who sided with the liberals. Those days are pretty much gone, and we have the Republican appointees being conservative, the Democratic appointees being liberal, and I guess, yeah, if you're sick of the predictability, you should probably go out and vote. If you want more liberal justices on the Supreme Court, if you want a chance for liberals to retake the Supreme Court or claw back at some of the conservative majority gains, go out and vote for President Biden or whoever the Democratic nominee is. Yeah, so democracy is fascinating. This is one of those things that we always have to keep in mind, and I feel like a lot of normie voters, they don't totally understand the importance of the Supreme Court. A lot of people who haven't gone to law school or weren't political science majors, they just think of who's in the office. They vote based on very superficial things, unfortunately. And I'm not saying voters are stupid, but there are a lot of people who just don't have time to tune into U.S. politics, don't have time to tune into what's going on with the Supreme Court, and don't really pay attention to all that stuff. So yeah, conclusion, there are a lot of possibilities. There's a possibility of a 7-2 conservative majority. There's a possibility that nothing happens. There's a possibility that Alito and Thomas get replaced with younger faces. And there's a possibility that liberals get to claw back at the conservative majority that's taken hold over the last 20 or 30 years or so. So yeah, I hope this video sheds some light on our current situation, and I hope it inspires you to vote. If you like this content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you.